Afternoon, everyone. Thanks, AusCERT, for the invitation to come and speak with you today about iDcare and our operations 18 months on from cutting the ribbon with Minister Keenan in 2014 and our colleagues from the Queensland Police Service, amongst others. In the brief time I have with you this afternoon, granted it's sleepy time, so I'll try and make this relatively engaging. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey as to where we've been, what the nature of our service is, and where we're heading this year. That might resonate with you and your organisations. I'm probably going to annoy a few people, so I'll use that as a caveat. I might upset a few industries on the way, but it's all in the interests of the community. So what is iDcare? This is a very simplified version of the landscape. You have CERTs and response organisations for industry and government, so AusCERT obviously being one, our secret squirrels in Canberra, and CERT Australia at the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department. And on your right is iDcare, and our focus is not on organisations, government and business so much, it's actually on providing that support to the community. So that's where we sit within the landscape. And that is a very simplified version because in between all of that are a bunch of other agencies and organisations that offer reporting lines. And whilst that might be a good thing, I might challenge some debate around whether or not that might actually be adding a lot of confusion to the community as to where one needs to go to get support and help. It's a very complex and crowded space, the reporting space, but in terms of support, we are it. I'm going to share with you a story about Joanne. Joanne's not her name. By the way, iDcare service is free and anonymous for the community. It's a not-for-profit organisation and a charity, and we intentionally don't ask the clients that engage our national hotline for any of their personal particulars, not surprisingly. Nor do we charge them for our service, although we have been a target of scammers already, which we wear as a badge of pride. Joanne is a young Victorian, and Joanne is studying at TAFE. She's studying tourism. And through employment.gov.au, through the Job Active Service, a Commonwealth Government initiative, she had expressed interest in a job as a part-time travel administrative assistant, and this was on the 30th of April. So it's a fairly recent case, and we've experienced around 20 to 22,000 cases over the last 12 months. So it's a fairly recent one. And Joanne's quite excited because within 24 hours they had arranged an interview of her via Skype without the video enabled function, and asked her to complete a personal particulars form, send a scanned image of her driver licence, pass on her tax file number, her bank details, things that you'd expect when things get a bit more serious in terms of the employment prospect. She sat a Skype interview and provided referee details, and some 24 hours later was given the thumbs up and got the job. And shortly thereafter, that same day, she was emailed by her contact, who also provided a New South Wales landline, and was asked to reimburse a company official for their travel. And she thought that was a fairly consistent activity to her job. The only difference is that the company had transferred the money to reimburse the employer to her account, her personal account, and she was to retain 5% and then move the balance of that money to the individual in China via MoneyGram. Now, Joanne is in her late teens and is new to the workforce. And as is the case with a lot of these types of situations, mum gets involved. And mum wised up to the fact that this didn't quite add up. And so she went down to the local police station, and they said, you need to talk to the Department of Employment, the Commonwealth Department of Employment, not the police. And so she did, and they said, you need to then report to ACORN, the Australian Cyber Online Reporting Network, which she did. And in her mind, she's thinking, have I just been recruited by organised crime? Is one of the first thoughts that she has. The other thoughts that she has, as she has expressed to us, is I have 5% of some proceeds of crime sitting in my personal bank account. What should one do with that? But her primary concern was they're now asking me to move $10,000 a week. How do I disengage with this organised crime group? They know where I live. They know everything about me. So from the local police, not the Queensland police, the local police, another state's local police, to employment, the Department of Employment, to ACORN. She was then looking around and thought, I better go to ScamWatch. She went to ScamWatch, who then said, thanks for your report. We're going to now pass you to the Attorney General's Department, who then passed her to us. Now you might think that's a bit stressful, and that might be the exception to the rule, but that is the rule. That's what happens. So that's not the minority of cases, that is the majority of cases. So the slide I showed you before around the tapestry of who's who in the zoo, whilst might be well-intentioned, actually creates further harm to those that experience identity and cybercrime, i.e. your customers. So where did it leave Joanne? So Joanne's story continues. iDcare is resourced with counsellors and psychologists. So we're not a tech outfit. We rely on good organisations like AusCERT and others to perform that role. We're there to pick up the pieces emotionally, and we're there to provide the pragmatic pathways that individuals need to take to build resilience around their identity once it's compromised, whether it be online or physical. Joanne's still waiting for police to engage with her, and it's now the 25th of May, after reporting it to them in the first week of May via ACORN. The reality is she probably won't hear from police at all. That's the reality. She's not quite interested in police investigating to arrest. At the time, she was interested in actually getting some advice from police as to what to do with the 5% commission in a bank account, because she doesn't want to be seen as a money launderer. And she wanted some advice at the time as to how to disengage with an organised crime group, which the police are well accustomed to. So we've been providing ongoing counselling with Joanne, and we've got grave concerns about her mental health at the moment. So what is iDcare? Primarily, it is a national case management centre. That is our bread and butter. So we operate a 1300 number and an 0800 number. So all calls in New Zealand route through to the Sunshine Coast, where, for those that don't know the Sunshine Coast, we're 200 kilometres up the road, just off Mooloolaba. And we're lucky to be there because the University of the Sunshine Coast has provided in-kind support to iDcare to the tune of around $800,000 to help us exist. So it's not a token gesture, that's actually keeping the lights on. Most of the revenue that we raise through our partnerships or sponsorships go into paying for our counsellors. So the National Case Management Centre is quite key to everything that we do, but we have the philosophy within iDcare that knowledge shared is knowledge doubled. So there's an onus on us to do things like this and inform you of what's going on out there. And we also run community programs. So we have programs in schools, and programs in aged care facilities as two groups that we believe are at particular risk of cyber and identity-related crimes. Our board is made up of industry and government leaders, and they're quite keen for iDcare to share our view of how organisations can be better supporters of their customers and how we can support them, support the community. So a lot of my effort and time is spent engaging with business and government on what we can do to give them a view of the customer experience that they may not see. And we also have a fair bit of fun in the National ID Lab, and that lab is all about looking at the human factors around cybercrime and what are those triggers psychologically that individuals might experience either pre or post these type of events. And we work very closely with our tertiary sector partners in Australia, New Zealand and the US there. A big part of what we do is not just the National Case Management Centre, but you could imagine if you lose your wallet or purse, how many organisations you might have represented in it. We spend an enormous number of resources maintaining a library of over 1,000 response plans across industry and government, so that if you call the hotline, not only are you able to access the counselling support, but you are, if you don't need that, you're able to access support that says, of those 20 organisations in your wallet, here is precisely the journey you'll need to take with all of them. And that's a huge investment that we make to maintain that library. We maintain it in two ways. We engage directly with organisations and seek their views on how they'd like their customers to behave and what they should prepare their customers to do. We don't really pay much attention to that, I should say, and that might seem self-defeating. We actually test organisations. So we have a secret shopping area, if you like. And so we're ringing organisations and testing what they're doing in terms of providing advice and the pathways that they enable their customers to go through. And so what you have here is the results of that. And so let me explain that. Postcode 3174 in Melbourne, so Noble Park and surrounding suburbs, our data's getting so good that we know that if you experience the same type of cyber identity crime in that postcode, you'll actually experience more harm than if you resided here. And so let me just explain what that means, putting aside the fact that that's the Premier of Victoria's postcode. It means that through our secret shopping testing and through our what we call our client experience scores, so every client that calls iDcare, or most, we ask them, who have you engaged before and what was that experience like? And what did they ask you to do? And was it useful? And all those measures that big business and big government probably collect in terms of customer experience. And what spits out is a score out of 10. The client response score is our testing of organisations. So we look at things like how many times do you call transferred? Is the information available online to tell me what to do if I'm a victim of cybercrime involving your company or government agency? How long am I waiting on the phone? We do a 10 a.m, 2 p.m. test to make it a bit more consistent. Is the advice consistent? So we don't test just once, we test multiple times. So there's a lot of effort that goes into that. So this is where I might upset a few people. I'm going to do it anyway. Your industry, so if I'm to guess, most here would probably work in that industry. You are the worst performers in the country at the moment in terms of client experience scores. So that means a score of 1.8 out of 10 means that not only are clients dissatisfied, the chances are that through their engagement with that industry, they've actually been more harmed. That's what that means. So that's the reality. If you're to look up here at sunny Queensland, if we're just looking at Queensland government responses, so that's an aggregate of number of government departments, it's generally on average a satisfactory result. Not a great result, but just a satisfactory result. And so a lot of our emphasis, as you would no doubt see now, is not just placed in supporting the individuals, but it's in trying to raise the standards of how organisations treat their customers. That's a really big part of it. 8% of our clients need face-to-face mental health treatment. And the reason why that's the case has got almost nothing to do with the crime, but everything to do with how they're treated as a result of it. So I don't want to paint a picture of panic, but the country's broken when it comes to this stuff. We're not in a good place at the moment. We invested over 65,000 hours of counselling last year. And the question that I'm often asked is, how long is a counselling session? And my response to that is as long as it takes. Because as the last presenter mentioned, it impacts people in very different ways. We collect around 114 variables per client. It's not question one, what's the answer, or question two, what's the answer? It's a conversation. And we get their blessing to use that information, albeit it's anonymous anyway, but use that information to inform groups like this and others about how to improve response standards. We're estimating that we'll invest over 80,000 this year, hours, in response. I mentioned the library that we maintain, and we do share that with our partners. Vic Roads is a good case study. Vic Roads is the driver licence issuer in Victoria. If somebody hacks my email and I have a scanned copy of a Vic Roads licence, different to what somebody might be told via other channels, the driver licence number is the most important credential to an identity thief. It's the number one. The card, who cares? It's the number that matters, because the number is the gateway to a lot of products and services out there. Okay, so we hear repeatedly every day with our clients when they report to particular law enforcement jurisdictions or government agency X or industry Y that it's okay if you've still got the card, the number doesn't mean anything. It's the opposite. It's everything. Okay, so even advice around that's important to get across to groups like this. Vic Roads, if you have your licence compromised, they can't do anything. Well, they won't do anything. It's different than can't. They won't do anything. You have to wait for it to then be further misused. So we're not in the prevention game, we're in the response game. So we'll have to wait for you to become more of a victim. And even then, nothing will be done unless a letter is signed by a superintendent at Victoria Police to say that your Vic Roads licence number has been compromised and misused. Now, the chance of that happening, because we've done some testing on this, is 0. So that won't happen. Vic Roads and Victoria Police are providing two different pieces of advice, albeit they are dependent. And that's the journey of a cybercrime victim. That's the journey, which is why things are a little bit more harmful in Victoria. The good news is that that's the same process in Queensland. I say it's good news because we've actually cracked the jackpot and had 1 or 2 clients manage to get a new driver licence number in Queensland. But it's still a process that's a bit backward. It's not at all preventative or supportive of the individual. Dean, we might just go to the internet. So this is the news that's just come in. So if we just click on the ever been knocked back for credit. So this is a live feed. How many credit bureaus have we got in Australia? How many? 3 on the mainland, 1 in Tasmania. The community only thinks there's 1. There's 3. How much do you have to pay for a credit report? Nothing. Yet most times the client won't be told you can get it for free and we'll pay $80. Most times. Okay. Who knows what a credit ban is? Credit ban means, under the privacy law, that you can request of the 3 credit bureaus that your credit report gets taken off the shelf. And that's actually a positive thing, because if I go down to Harvey Norman or Westpac or whoever it might be, and I say, my name's David Lacey and I want to get credit, and here's my driver's license number that I've just compromised off David Lacey, they'll go and check your credit record and it won't happen because you've got a ban in place. It's one of the only things that a victim of this crime can do to prevent misuse where credit is involved. It is actually one of the only things that can be done. The problem, there's several, but the problem with that particular one is you need to go to all three bureaus. It takes 2 days to get it in place. Criminals on average take 72 hours to misuse. It's only in place for 21 days. Now, although on average the criminals take 72 hours to misuse, some criminals might decide to misuse you in 18 months' time or 12 months or 8 months. So what does the client do then? Do they then ask for another 21 days? Well, they can't, because they need a police report number. And they can't get a police report number for a cybercrime because it goes to ACORN, and 9 times out of 10 you're not going to get anything. So that is the journey. That's what happens for people in relation to credit bureaus. Thanks, Dean. So what have we learnt? 18 months on, not going to leave you negative. Let's talk about the positive stuff. In the previous presenter from Sri Lanka, AusCERT, spoke about offline and online victimisation. What's interesting is we see a blur in Australia. So a Microsoft telephone scam might very quickly relay into a remote access to a personal computer. So is that an online or is that physical? Right, so it's a blurring of that environment. We see a mix of about half-half compromises occurring offline, compromises occurring online, but we see almost exclusively the then misuse occurring online. So there's shift to the online environment in terms of misuse. So we don't decouple physical versus online easily at iDcare. And when we started iDcare, we certainly didn't define identity theft or identity crime. We let the consumers define it for us. What you see there is the summary of what our data tells us 18 months on. 19 hours is the average time it takes someone to effectively respond as much as they can through all of those scenarios I just presented to you, unsurprisingly. What's interesting, which I think parallels the Sri Lankan experience, is the dominance of women. I don't think it reflects who is actually a victim here. I think it just reflects the gender that's more likely to, I'd say, my wife would say, mature enough to reach out, but those that are reaching out. Unsurprisingly, 25 to 44-year-olds is the segment of the market that's most prevalent, and that tends to reflect those that are transactioning more. So there's no surprise there. This is a kicker, 87% self-detect. So of all the money going into organisations in terms of detection, the vast majority of people calling us are the ones who are detecting it first. And they're often detecting it through the misuse activity, such as a bill in the mail, or some other type of indicator that their identity's been misused as opposed to the compromise. I was mentioned the 8% referral to mental health treatment, 3.5% or just shy reporting to law enforcement. So there's a massive gap in the intelligence around law enforcement as to what's going on here, although I think that might be changing with ACORN, at least the information around that. And 27,000 or just over was the average value of misuse experience, but there was a huge range. So the median was around 12,000 for that one. We had 83%, unsurprisingly, feeling very dissatisfied with their experience with organisations. So this is probably new to most of you that don't see then that consequential impact of the industry that you work in and love so much in terms of security. But this is the human impact. We do have a partnership model, so if those who are interested in tempting fate and partnering with iDcare as an organisation, and we'd love to have a discussion with you. As I mentioned before, we don't exist without funding of our partners, and what we can provide you is a bit of a sense of where your organisation sits in terms of how it responds to its customers. But also there's a bunch of other activities you might be interested in engaging with us on, such as some of our awareness raising programs. We also have a process of accreditation where we are looking at your processes and we do test you out in terms of the customer experience. Chrissy, if you're going to be at the dinner tomorrow night, Chrissy will be there with Sue Lee. They're two of our most experienced counsellors, and they'd love to hear from you, and they'd be more than willing to share their experiences on the phone with people like Joanne and others. Do take the opportunity to pick their brains. You don't have to pay a consulting fee for it. It's a free hit. And they're national treasures in my mind. Chrissy is the one who's been leading our cyber education in relation to aged care and students. So we have a program in Queensland and the Northern Territory that we're trialling at the moment where we're connecting years 10, 11 and 12 students. We're coaching them around identity and cyber security. And then we're teaming up with aged care providers and we're actually letting the students educate the aged care residents on this topic to try and get some intergenerational socialisation happening on this important topic. And Sue Lee's the other person who'll be here tomorrow night. And she's heavily involved in the Respect My ID program, which is targeted at school kids that Queensland Police have been a good promoter of and participant, which has been most welcome. Happy to take any questions that you might have. Do I do this electronically? Can we do it the old-fashioned way? Yes.
So I'm Darren Pauly from the Register. Thanks for your presentation. Great. I'm interested just on you were speaking about Vicpol and Queensland role in relation to compromised licences.
Yes.
So just so I can fully understand that, if my licence was, if I had evidence that my licence was, say, it was compromised somehow online.
Yes.
Someone had
Yes.
a copy of my document.
Yes.
Then I go to report that to the police.
Yes.
It's not going to be cancelled or reissued until there's evidence that it's actually been misused.
Correct.
So how would you know? How do you know? When does that evidence occur?
So typically what will happen is that people will check the 3 credit reports after speaking with us. They'll request their credit report, and one of the only ways, unless you get a bill in the mail or some strange things are happening with your email, you'll start to see inquiries being made. So if you're with Vodafone, you might see an inquiry from Telstra. It won't say in your credit report identity theft. It'll say inquiry Telstra this date. And you'll think to yourself, well, I've never engaged with Telstra. And that's an indicator that your identity's been misused. Now, the issue there is, if on your credit report you see instances of identity theft, the credit bureaus aren't the one to correct it. It has to be the credit provider. So then you have to go to each of the individual ones to get them to investigate to then correct a credit record. Yeah, yeah.
So, but in terms of the police, so what would you have the police do? If you could...
The most important thing the police can do in this crime type is obtain confidence that it's a legitimate report and provide a report number. If police were to investigate all identity crime, they would do nothing else except investigate identity crime. So that's not the solution. We can't arrest our way out of this. That they play a very important role, and the role that they play that's so important is a legitimacy exercise to say this is a bona fide victim, and the ecosystem needs to pay attention.
So if I called up and they gave me a number,
Yes.
And I said my ID's been compromised,
Yep.
give me a number, how's that going to change my life? What is I then going to be able to do?
You'll be able to extend your credit ban if you need to. You'll be able to get you'll be able to get a new license number if it's been misused. You can't get it without a police report number.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only one. Yes, Graham. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Something I've been a bit concerned about, and I think my blog a little bit about, is driver's licences and the fact that people are scanning them. Like if I go into a club or if I go into a pub, they've got scanners. Now, I don't know about you, but my confidence in their security, what I'm suggesting is that we've got a massive database of scanned licences. And if you said, A, they've got my address on it, they've got the licence number, the address points to where they can get the utilities bill to get their... So it's identity theft in the making. But one of the things that really worries me is that they tell me that my driver's licence is the property of the Queensland Government. So do you think it would be viable for the Queensland Government to start to say to these people who are scanning Queensland official documents that they have to, for example, like PCI DSS, they have to have a standard for if they want to keep those licences beyond a certain period of time, because once the criminals work out that these licences are sitting on servers in the surf club down the road and everywhere else, and there's millions of them being scanned every day, I just see this as the Queensland Government can, and all governments can take a role and say that is our identification. The hotel I just gave my driver's licence to, they scanned it.
Yes.
I should have...
I have a copy right here.
Thank you. And I should have the right to ask them, how are you
Yeah.
going to secure or treat
Yep.
my document that really belongs to the Queensland Government?
So this is a fantastic topic. Under the privacy laws in Australia, we have a legal right to say no, but the reality is we don't have a practical right. And I would argue, as friends in common would, and I've heard them before, say, why would you put your organisation at risk like that by scanning those documents? Is a pretty legitimate question. And I posed that in the media last year and got a hotel association representative say that they've got the best security and they're all fine. So we can just relax. I think it's a great point. If Queensland Government said it's our credential, then I've got about $50 million worth of loss that I can shift to them from the people that have called iDcare if they're happy to accept that. I think it's a debate that's a debate for most that issue documents of one of convenience. And it's convenient in one hand to say you own it, and when it's not, it's convenient to just wipe your hands of it. I like that as a thought. I like the idea of maybe taking identity to the place of seriousness that it actually needs to be. The reason why it probably hasn't got there yet is because not many people can see that human impact that it's having in the community. Now, the financial institutions that we work with every day, the big banks, they've got processes that are generally good. And you'll see that in those scoring that I would have showed you before. They do it because they're motivated financially to get it good. Okay? But I think, we can't say, for example, credit card fraud's okay because it's 0.002% of a transaction, when the reality is we inconvenience 1.1 million people a year waiting 10 days to get a new card. That's the human impact. And it's about getting that human impact message out there. But good thought, Graham. Yes?
So one of the 87% that realises it's been done.
Yes.
How the hell do you prove that was done with your licence number and not some other?
Yeah, so most organisations, if you see a telco has decided to set up an account in your name, it comes through as a bill, or you might happen to stumble across it on your credit report. Unfortunately, most organisations aren't savvy enough to tell people what of theirs was used to set up the account, although that's something we do stress with our clients to go back to these organisations to get, and it's at that point that one realises that it is the licence. You have to look or re-engineer what the application process is to see how your licence might have been misused. There's 17% that have no idea. They've got an assumption, but they have no real confidence of where the compromise was.
And what's the willingness of those organisations to hand over that?
We get good success because we refer them to the Privacy Commissioner, who we have on speed dial, to just make sure they understand what the rights are of the consumer. Organisations don't want things to go down a financial ombudsman path or a telecommunications industry ombudsman path, because it then starts costing them more money than just telling them it was their licence. Yeah. But that takes us to do that. And we are seeing the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. Don't feel disappointed or depressed. We can do something about this. All right. Thanks, everyone.